Great. Thank you for the introduction, Dr. Go, and thank you very much to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts on precision medicine as a whole and Engine Biosciences' role and innovative approach in addressing the challenge, opportunity of unleashing novel precision medicines from data sets. I'd like to share a few topics for today. Firstly, I'd like to provide some introductory context for myself and our company, Engine Bio, and talk a little bit about the opportunity that we see in precision medicine, particularly in drug discovery, enabled by large data sets like population health data. Engine Bio certainly is taking a novel approach to harnessing such data sets for research and development and ultimately commercialization of new therapeutics that can impact patient lives. I'll talk about that. And then in the latter part of my talk, I'd love to share some of the things that we've learned along the way as we've been building the company and interacting a lot at the interface of data, biology, and drug discovery. And talk a bit about the opportunities and also challenges that can be addressed and how Singapore and other organizations gathering data can think about using it to ultimately generate great impact for the people. So a bit about Engine Biosciences as a company. We are a data-driven company at our core. We utilize technology as well as a significant amount of experimental biology, particularly the form of using next-generation CRISPR-based gene editing that was developed by our scientific founders. We have great links with our founders and their academic institutions, particularly out in the United States, as well as with research institutes in Singapore, collaborating on both the technology as well as applications for therapeutics that can treat patients that are relevant here in Singapore as well as beyond. Our platform strictly sits as intersection of technology and biology, and it's proven to be very useful in producing a pipeline of novel targets and therapeutics that we're developing, principally focused on addressing various cancer types. We're in the preclinical stage of drug discovery and development, and that has been supported significantly by a great group of investors across Singapore, Asia, and the United States, as shown on the right-hand side. I am, as noted in the introduction, the CEO and one of the co-founders of the company. I've been joined by over 40 people working in an interdisciplinary fashion. So we have biologists, data scientists, chemists, engineers, and all led by a management team that has together almost 200 years of experience in the biotech and pharmaceutical industries. We supplement that on our core internal team with great scientific advisors and founders, as listed on the left-hand side, some of the leading pioneers in the fields of synthetic biology, genome engineering, and computational biology. And on the right-hand side, we actually spend a lot of our thinking about how do we make sure we do our work from a bench to bedside manner. So linking very closely with clinical experts, physician scientists who are working particularly in the precision cancer medicine space. So the opportunity that we are interested in addressing at Engine, and I'm sure many of you in the audience are also very well attuned to, is thinking about how we can enable and empower precision medicine in the coming decades. Clearly, precision medicine, which is the concept of being able to define tailored treatments approaches for subpopulations of patients, is something that has been very much transformed in healthcare in recent years. To really enable this, though, we need actually data. We need to have the data that allows us to stratify patients in specific subpopulations. And then we need the data that can link those populations based on their genetics and biology with specific treatments that will be more effective. So data is really core to enabling precision medicine. Now, if we get this right, there's tremendous opportunity from a clinical perspective and also from an economic perspective. On the left-hand side, just a couple metrics that indicate historical to date opportunities that have been created through this. So we see much higher clinical response rates when there is a biomarker that defines a specific patient subpopulation for treatment versus when you do not have one. And we also see a significant a market size for companies and that pursue the space. Importantly, this ensures that there's sufficient ROI for research in the space. Yet there's a lot more much more opportunity out there. Even in the United States, which has the most access to innovative therapies, only 9% of cancer patients have access to an improved a precision cancer medicine. So the vast majority do not, even in the US. And when we think about other countries, including Singapore, the problem is just as acute. So great opportunity for us to ultimately think about unleashing new precision medicines. Now, our approach at Engine is to really get at the fundamental bases of disease biology. And specifically, we like to look at the mechanisms underlying these diseases through the lens of genetic networks. Now, the reason this is important is that biology is, of course, complex, and the complexity derives not just because there are numerous single components, like the 20,000 genes that are in the human genome. It's actually due to the fact that each of these components interact with each other and form combinations with each other that drive actual biological function and ultimately the disease phenotypes that we might be trying to treat. So those 20,000 components we might need to analyze for every disease become hundreds of millions of pairs, trillions of triplets. The space is vast, and hence we need very systematic and scalable approaches to address this. If we do that, and we can find the right specific subunits in the form of combinations or gene interactions, the proof is that in the clinic, we can enable new combination therapies or new precision medicines, like in the form of cancer. This example shown on the bottom of the page, the example where PARP inhibitors, a type of targeted therapy, have been shown to be especially effective when patients carry a genetic mutation in the BRCA gene. So these are real great opportunities that Engine unleashes by analyzing gene networks in greater scale, speed, and detail. Our approach to doing that is leveraging something called the NetMapper platform. We wanted to start the company and really have a foundational core that spans both the computational machine learning side, because that allows us to analyze data, identify particular patterns in those hundreds of millions or billions or trillions of genetic combination possibilities, such that when we get to the next step of our process, which is to use our high throughput CRISPR gene editing platform in our labs to test those out, we have a higher probability of finding interesting potential targets that can inform precision medicines. So we deeply link the use of our computation with our wet lab-based CRISPR screening so that they're working in close concert with each other for the discovery process. What comes out of that are novel biological insights that derive from both computational human data linked predictions as well as experimental validation in disease cells. And we use our internal drug discovery teams and drug development experience to turn those into products. So we particularly work in the small molecule chemistry space right now, but the opportunity for products actually goes well beyond just small molecules once you have the right biological insights. Now, without getting into a ton of detail, the approach that we undertake with our platform tends to be very systematic and follows a logical step, where we start by harnessing significant amounts of data sets. And this is relevant to our conversation today, where those data sets derive from human clinical populations. So we draw on genomic data, transcriptomic data, clinical outcome data, and other sorts of data into the top of the funnel. So our machine learning then uses that to analyze across the entire landscape of all genes and all possible interactions between those genes. Then we get down to a short list that we experimentally test rigorously in our own wet labs in various types of disease models, then come down with a high confidence short list of targets that we will proceed to move forward. Each of those typically with a biomarker that defines a specific patient subpopulation that can be treated in the clinic. Now, this has proven over the last few years to have been successful in the sense that we've been able to establish the platform. We've shown that by rigorously training our algorithms with large external data sets, as well as internal data sets we've generated through our own web lab, that our algorithms display much higher predictive performance than published benchmarks from other groups. And this is shown on the left-hand side. In the middle, you can see one metric, which is that we look at, which is does our AI actually help our experimental validation, the experimental testing, be more efficient by yielding higher probability predictions? And the answer is yes. So we've shown over a 10x increase in experimental efficiency on this metric. On the right-hand side is just one example of the several programs in our pipeline where we've identified, in this case, showing a liver cancer validation experiment, a therapeutic program that is completely novel, that shows really quite strong efficacy in limiting cancer cell growth and viability. So our pipeline is defined by several programs that have come out of that established platform. We're primarily focused in the precision oncology space. Two of our programs, which we have named ENB812 and 255, are in the lead identification and lead optimization stages of drug discovery. We have additional targets as well. Each of our programs tend to treat subpopulations on the order of tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of potential patients that could be genetically defined and identifiable in the clinic. And every single year, we're actually screening through millions of more opportunities through the platform. As a side note, we have actually worked with other collaborators, both companies as well as researchers, to deploy this in other diseases, including in dermatology and in CNS disease. So the applications are broad for our approach. Now I want to shift into the second part of my talk, which is sharing some of the observations and learnings that we've gained along the way as it pertains to how data sets can be built and accessed and utilized by groups who are trying to innovate, take risk, and ultimately seek to unleash new medicines that can help patients. So what are some of the common challenges that I think we have certainly faced, and what others have faced? I think one of the big challenges here is not obviously the recognition of the opportunity that such data sets give us, but it's really about how do you actually make the linkages happen between those who want to use data and for those who have the data and those who want to use data for drug discovery or diagnostic or other types of product purposes. The first is really availability of relevant human data, and I would stress two things here. Actually, it's availability is certainly important, but relevance is also very important. I mean, we like to talk about big data, but oftentimes it's really the high quality and relevant piece of data that are very informative for the drug discovery activities that we undertake. The data that's specifically derived from a certain disease type that has no actually relevance to another disease type where the research is done, then is not what we would consider relevant. Data quality is very important, and I think that the underlying aspects of this are, how was the data generated? What were the experimental methods in which the data was generated? Is that, again, relevant to the type of research or development that's being done? Is the data curated? Has it been cleaned? Oftentimes, there's a big step of cleaning the data after it's been accessed, and that can slow down the pace of innovation. Speed and ease of access tends to be another challenge, and I think something that's where it's addressed well, as I'll show in some case studies, can actually lower barriers and promote, I think, a lot of activity in terms of translating those data sets into actual products and outcomes. The last thing I think is increasingly seen as an important aspect of utilizing data is not just making it for analytics to make predictions, but actually being able to really rapidly experiment test these. So these are really kind of significant challenges that are generally faced. I think I've been personally excited that and the company has been really committed to building our strong research core in Singapore, in large part because we see particular strengths in Singapore and the opportunity to create large and population level data sets. We think there are a lot of strengths. some note on the page that'll be familiar to many of you, having obviously national healthcare system and records, having great ethnic diversity, having innovative researchers and a cluster of biotech and pharma companies that with whom we could collaborate and join forces to innovate with, and the ability to actually finance a good data gathering effort at scale that is appropriate for the type of work that we do. So all the underlying aspect of this is that we believe, and I think many of us do, is that the value of gathering data sets is really borne out when actual insights come out that are used to create better products that can reach the patient. And really it's about, it's somewhat of a numbers game. The more innovators, the more ideas that are being tested, the more products and the better outcomes will be generated. So what are some of those critical ingredients that I'll share just as I share some interesting case studies that I thought to bring out? I think number one is important to have enough volume of data, so sufficient scale to drive statistical significance. Secondly is, how do we think about access? So access for the broader community. The more we can lower the barriers, the more activity there will be, and the more ultimately will come out of the research that's being undertaken. And thirdly, speed is probably probably one of the most critical lifebloods, certainly from the industry aspect, but also other research contexts, whether it's related to funding, competition, or the fact that patients are waiting for products to come out of this work. Speed is really critical. So I want to close off by sharing a couple case studies that I thought were interesting. This one is from another government, so looking at the UK Biobank. And we've had some good interactions with them. And I think a few things that we took away were, firstly, it's clearly a large-sized and well-scoped study that spans multiple decades. So that's great. So the data has great relevance. I think importantly, they've worked out a model where there is open and streamlined lanes of access for researchers, whether they're in academia or in the commercial setting. There's no difference actually in terms of access between the two. And almost all access applications are approved. This has driven really great research output, and that's important because the research output actually that derives from the people of the UK will most naturally be relevant to benefit the people of the UK. So it's really exciting that they've been able to drive this kind of output, and also derive kind of more industry clustering effects in the UK, as shown on the right-hand side. The next example I just wanted to show is from a private research institution lens, so the Broad Institute, particularly with their DepMap consortium and database. So this is a large amount of cancer genomics and related data that they've made available completely to the public on a fairly timely fashion, but where they have almost a freemium model where companies can join in and pay in to get some extended access, as well as interactions with the researchers. That obviously drives some economic benefit that helps fund more of this data gathering effort at the Broad. This has also driven great R&D output and also has helped derive some clustering benefits from the biotech and pharma companies that have joined in. The last case study that I'll share is looking at a private company, 23andMe, which many of you probably have read about in the news. So for-profit company that over the past many years has built a database deriving from over 5 million customers, so genetic data. And there, I think they've collaborated with other pharma companies where the companies that like GSK are really good at drug development and commercialization. And can really utilize, I think, this data to productize some of the insights that derive from 23andMe's assets. In this case, 23andMe is actually paying in and taking risk alongside GSK to turn those into products. So there are certainly multiple models here that whether they're government, private research institutes, or for-profit institutes, where data has been gathered at great scale. Access modalities have been figured out, generally promoting wider forms of access, and ultimately great economic benefit. But I think projected clinical benefit will come out of those things. So to summarize, before I kind of close off my talk and move on to take some questions from the audience, I'd like to hit a few key points that I mentioned today. Firstly, having high quality human data in sufficient quality will fuel better medicine and healthcare, specifically thinking about precision medicine in the case of how Engine thinks about it. But certainly beyond strictly looking at precision medicine, we need to have the data and the insights on our patients' biology and humans to be able to make the right decisions in the clinic. Secondly, is as product development is oriented towards the data that fuels the R&D, it's important that there are mechanisms that are worked out to make this available to the innovators who are really clamoring to take appropriate risk and test out their ideas, so some of them will ultimately benefit. We're very convinced that Singapore has great advantages in building a world-leading population data health program, and if there are ways to actually have open access with reduced barriers from whether it's from a cost, time, or criteria basis, learning from some of the examples around the world, we are sure that's going to promote much more innovation in economic and industry development. And ultimately, products that are developed with the help of data from Singapore, the Singapore population, will be highly relevant and beneficial for Singapore patients down the road. And so on that note, I'd like to close off my talk. I hope you enjoyed my brief run through of Engine and our perspectives dealing with data sets and how they can drive drug discovery.
Thank you, Jeffrey, so much for your very insightful sharing. I'm very impressed by the rigorous process of development you have taken. Probably this is the Q&A session started now, and one of the pressing questions I guess most of the audience is having is, what are the major ethical dilemma in precision medicine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think as with any kind of form of data as it relates to people, there are probably a number of issues that the field tackles with. When you think about precision medicine, I think one thing to consider is that the concept of precision medicine requires stratifying or grouping patients in the population into subgroups based on different reasons. So one question is often, as we think about those subgroups, does that create any particular biases in the way we either organize those or the way we ultimately treat those patients? I think another and I say somewhat related challenges. As we think about precision medicine and the therapeutics and the diagnostics that get developed as a result of analyzing data from particular subgroups, the question is, who actually has which populations, which subgroups have actually been able to give their data, because those are the ones for which those products are probably going to be most relevant. So as an example, there's a significant amount of efforts to use data sets that emanate from the United States, because the NIH, as an example, has been pretty good about making some of that genomic information available. Now, then sans serif, if products are developed and the broader global industry uses those data sets to drive R&D, the products are probably going to be highly relevant for the source populations in the United States. So how do we think about the broader aspects of making actual data sets that are relevant to a broader swath of the population, whether it's geographically focused, whether it's racial, ethnic, or even thinking about the income levels, are some of the patients that will consent to giving data may swing one way or the other in terms of where they stand from an income or wealth perspective, and given various access to facilities and others. So quite a few things to think about, I think, ethically, and I think that's why it's something where the more brains that come together and really kind of think about some of these core issues, and how do we kind of broaden the way we do precision medicine related R&D beyond specific pockets of the world, I think is quite important.
Another question probably will be, will precision medicine be very expensive, that it is only for the privileged and not really for the mass?
Yeah, so I think I think cost is always a challenging question with anything related to medicine and healthcare. And certainly, we think about precision medicines, it is something that has been challenging. I think underlying this is that developing any sort of medicine requires many years of R&D. It involves significant amount of failures. 9 out of 10 kind of clinical trials don't work out. So the the field needs to figure out how to recoup the cost in some way. And I think as a result, yes, there are some of the precision medicines have been, do launch at higher prices. They also involve some steps where, the additional steps of having to get a genetic test or a diagnostic done before necessarily a medicine is prescribed. So I think the short answer is yes, there are these challenges around cost. Now, there are many kind of good ideas about how to address those. I think I think one perspective is from a broader perspective is that the more innovation and competition that we promote, the more likely there are going to be multiple products that are going to need to ultimately compete in part based on price, and we certainly see that in certain drug classes. And I think that's certainly one avenue of doing this. Clearly, I think there's the more we can de-risk some of the early stages of doing R&D, such that it's not a paradigm where 9 out of 10 drugs fail in the clinic and hence cause a lot of dollars to have to be recouped by the one successful drug out of the 10. That can also help ameliorate the pricing issues as well.
Thank you. Now, of course, now I'm reading off from the Q&A session, and the highest voted question now is about insurance. What is your thoughts on working with insurance company to ensure that patients are not penalized for having certain mutation like those that can be hereditary in nature? That would be one of the key concern about the public as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. It probably links also to another potential, to the first question, that the potential ethical issues or considerations for the broader field. It's certainly not. You figure out how you think about not discriminating on the basis of carrying certain genes. Some of those might even be incidental to the reason why you got actually the genetic test in the first place. And so I think those are definitely challenges. I think for us as a drug discovery and development company, our perspective as product companies is we will certainly we certainly have to work closely with insurers as well as other payers, which include national governments and healthcare agencies, in making sure that our products are appropriately priced, provide the right benefit for the patients relative to how they're being costed out. And then as we think about kind of how do we think about the potential discriminatory aspects of things, I think the most important thing here is we want to make sure we promote a system where and have an ability to be able to provide treatments for when people actually have issues. And I think for the insurance companies, we would actively want to work with them to ensure that if these genetic tests happen and they reveal certain risk factors, but the patient is going to actually have an actual product and be able to be treated. And so of course, somehow the costs need to work out on a system-wide level, and we would want to work with them on making sure that happens. But we really want to focus on making sure those products can be available when people actually have those risk variants.
In view of time, I can only pick one more question, and the question I pick is really just one of the key things that is close to my heart as well. What are your insights on governance maturity in precision medicine?
If I understand the question, it's about the government maturity in precision medicine?
Governance maturity. In terms of governance, what are the steps we need to take to ensure that the governance is well taken care of?
I see. So governance. Yeah. So I mean, governance systems are absolutely important. So I think as we think about governance at the data side, which I think probably a topic here, I do think as data, there needs to be governing bodies to ensure that data is ethically collected, data as it potentially is kind of access is ethically treated, de-identified appropriately, that there is appropriate vetting of who is able to handle that and what they do with that, and that there are appropriate kind of agreements in place to ensure that there's no kind of mishandling of such data as it informs precision medicine, because certainly that is some of the most critical issues for the patients, for the contributors of the data, as well as for society to handle. So important to have governance bodies. I think the maturity level of having those, I think some institutions are very good at that in terms of having appropriate governance and also having appropriate kind of systems in place such that decisions can be made in a relatively timely fashion.
We have come to the close of the session. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, and everyone for your very active participation.